Well, thank you. It's always good to be up in the Mississippi Delta, especially this changed Mississippi Delta, or perhaps I should say somewhat changed Mississippi Delta. This is an appropriate place to speak about this book because I have vivid memories of hiding from police along this particular street, the county courthouses over there, and I have even more vivid memories of posses and city police here. And I have memories, and this is really what much of the book is about, the very, almost exceptionally strong people of Greenwood who history doesn't include. I tell the story of some of them in the book, and I won't do it here. I'll just announce some names. You know, the Green family here in Greenwood, Mississippi, almost a legendary family for their strength. The McGees, Laura McGee ran the sheriff off her farm outside of Greenwood with her Winchester. There were exceptionally strong people, and much of the Southern movement is lodged in these strong people who protected us and, in fact, taught us very much. I'll get back to that thought. I'm often asked, well, Charlie, why'd you do this particular book? And when you read the book, as I trust all of you will, you'll see that this is really much more than a book about guns. I have been a working reporter most of my life since leaving Mississippi. As a working reporter, I have primarily been a foreign affairs reporter. That's what my working life, say, at National Geographic was very much like. I helped establish, when I left National Geographic, allafrica.com, an internet news service concerning Africa, which is now the largest internet service on Africa in the world. I recommend, if you're interested in Africa, you click on to allafrica.com, and it's almost the only way to keep up day to day with news events. And it's a news site. It's not, you know, a feature site. It's a news site. This is what is happening in Nigeria. This is what is happening in South. So I've been a working reporter, and one of the things I learned almost immediately as I entered into the field, or the craft as I think of it, as reporting, is that news, and I think news is more often distorted by what's left out more than any bias that creeps in a report. You can spot bias, and but if something's left out, you don't know it's left out unless you study the field yourself. And the average person, this is a problem with history too, and it is particularly a problem with the history of the Southern freedom movement or the Mississippi freedom movement, people's opinions or thoughts about what took place in Mississippi or what took place in Alabama or what took place across the Black Belt South is mostly shaped by what hasn't been told. So that's what drove the writing of this book, essentially my dissatisfaction with the history of the movement as it's been presented. And that problem operates at several different lines. So I'll tell you one story. You know, all reporters have one or two stories in their back pockets. So when I did the Bob Moses book, when was that? In 2001, I think that book came out. And I brought the book is a book about education. When I brought the book to give it to some people in Mississippi who had helped me including a principal at a middle school in Medgar Evers' old neighborhood in Jackson. I gave it to the principal, and then was coming up here to the Delta and was sitting on the steps of the school with these middle school students, well, half a dozen of them, from Brinkley Middle School, the name of the school. And as it happens, the school is across the street from the Medgar Evers Public Library. I'm sorry, the Fannie Lou Hamer Public Library. So I decided to engage these middle schools and school kids in what I only half jokingly call old guy talk, and asked them if they knew anything about Mrs. Hamer. And if they did, they should tell the other students sitting on the steps what they knew. And they didn't know anything, not a one of these kids. My ride came, and I told them, as I rose, pointing at the library, that she was important to what Mississippi is today. They needed to know about her. And I told them I would be back in a few days, and I would tell them some things about Mrs. Hamer. And I was about to tell them a story about Mrs. Hamer. And I was pointing at the library across the street. But when I said, well, I knew her. And when I said I knew her, one of these kids, maybe 13 years old, leapt to his feet, stared at me in total amazement, and said, I never will forget the words, "Mr. Cobb, you was alive back then?" And I understood it at one level. I'm talking about some lady whose name is chiseled onto the library. And how could I know, somebody famous enough and old enough to have their name chiseled? And I put aside, my saying something like, yeah, me and Freddie Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and Harriet Tubman, all of us used to sit around and try to decide what to do in the struggle against slavery, and just dropped it. But it did place in my mind, and I was still doing mainly foreign affairs report, that it did place in my mind the necessity of doing the history. And if anybody was going to begin to meet that necessity, it probably should be me, I said. Well, you're a writer, Charles. Self, you're a writer. And I literally shifted gears. I've done very little foreign affairs writing since the book Radical Equations came out. I've really concentrated on trying to figure out how to convey in writing what I think is important to know about the Southern Freedom Movement. Now, what I write is not the whole story. It's not even most of the story. It's just some of the stories that's trying to fill in what has been absent from the movement. And there are a lot of things, you may or may not know right now that this is the 50th anniversary of the Mississippi Freedom Summer, and that's being commemorated in Jackson right now, and that's what brought me to Mississippi on this particular trip. I have a problem with the way that's looked at, because in some respects it's looked at as if it came out of nowhere. It's not connected to anything in people's thinking. Yes, a bunch of kids from the North came down to free the downtrodden Mississippians, and did so. Julian has a quip when at least when I talked to him when I was working on this book, and we were talking about this problem of history, and Julian said public understanding of history can be boiled, Julian Bond said the public understanding of history can be boiled down to really one sentence. That is, Rosa sat down, Martin stood up, then the white folks saw the light and saved the day. If you want to add a second sentence, you could say, and then a few years later, Stokely Carmichael shouted out Black Power and destroyed the good movement of love and redemptive suffering. This kind of oversimplification is what I'm struggling to deal with. And at the heart of this, and really at the heart of this book, is conveying what movement people thought. People did more than act. They acted